Everyone, so in this tutorial I'm going to show you some of the basics of scaled drafting. Drafting is a way of drawing real measured spaces smaller than life so that we can fit them on the page, but that their spatial relationships stay the same. We can say that the world around us exists at 1:1, which is the actual measure of real world objects. When we want to draw those for the purpose of analysis and proposal on a piece of paper, we need to shrink those objects down by what we call a scale factor. A scale factor is a ratio that states one real world unit is equivalent to an X number of imaginary units. Luckily in Canada we work in metric, so all of our scale factors are units of millimeters and meters, which are really easily divisible, rather than imperial where the units are in fractions and that will just make your head explode. We call the drawings we create plans, sections, and elevations orthographic projection. This means seeing the world through descriptive geometry without distortions. We ignore things like converging lines and the curvature of the earth when we draw, and we make use of parallel and perpendicular measured lines to relate objects in space. We're pretty familiar with plan view through our use of maps, so most of us are used to seeing the world in orthographic projection already by means like Google Maps, and this is the view that's easiest to start with. So I'll start with an overview of the tools that we use in drafting. I'm drawing on trace paper today. You probably all have that. You just roll it out and we can tape it down at the edges if we want to keep it in place. This is a ruler. We call it a straight edge, and it has a cork backing so it doesn't slide around on the page. I recommend that you do use metal rulers as opposed to plastic ones. This is really useful because you can use it to cut along with an X-Acto knife when you're making models, and the edge won't get all cut up like a plastic one would. You can see the plastic ruler here. The edge is really jagged and it just gets kind of chunky over time. That leads to an uneven line. So metal edges will ensure that you always have a nice straight line. Sarah's asked you to use a T-square. This is basically a metal ruler, which is longer than this. It's about 24 inches with a perpendicular edge on one side so that you can set it against your desk or table and then just move it up and down to ensure it's always parallel to the XY axis. I don't have a T-square or a parallel rule, so I'm just going to be using this metal edge today to demonstrate. You generally use a parallel ruler with a triangle. In architecture school, we always glued dimes to the bottom of our triangles to reduce the contact between the plastic and the paper so that we didn't smudge the graphite while we were drawing. In drafting, we slide the triangle along the parallel ruler just like this so we can draw our vertical upright lines. I just have this little protractor from a geometry set. I'm just going to have to make do with this one. You're asked to have an adjustable triangle, which is one that can be either 90 degrees to your T-square or another angular configuration of your choosing. It has like a dial that you can change the angle on. These are lead pointers. I'm using two so that I don't have to swap out the leads when I want to draw lighter or darker lines. This works like a mechanical pencil, but with just one really big lead at a time. And this lead, it's not really lead, it's called graphite, but we always call them leads for some reason. To sharpen it, I showed you this in another video, but you just use this lead pointer. It has two indicators, one for a blunt point and one for a sharp point. You extend the lead from the pointer down into the hole and then just bring it up here and swirl it around into the hole. Once it's sharp, you blot it into the white blotter to get rid of any graphite dust. Speaking of leads, these are drafting leads. I have 2H, which is harder, and H, which is in the middle, and HB, which is a little softer and darker. H stands for hardness and B stands for black. So the harder it is, the lighter and thinner the line will be. And the blacker it is, the softer the lead and the darker and thicker your lines will be. You might want to pick up some darker leads than I have, like maybe a 2B or so, so that once you draw really thick lines, you can get them pretty dark. I also keep a couple erasers around. I like this pencil style eraser, which is good for small areas. And I think that you're asked to have a drafting brush as well, which is useful to wipe away all your little eraser bits and pieces and any other detritus on your desk. So this engineering scale is mentioned, and this is something that you will use like no matter if you're drafting or not. There's lots of different types. So this is a ruler that has 3 sides to it, and it has all of these scales written on the edges. So this one has 1 to 5, 1 to 100, 1 to 10, 1 to 20, 1 to 2, and 1 to 50. This is a really useful way of just easily translating our real-world measurements from sight into scaled drawings. So if we know that 1 centimeter is equal to 1 centimeter in real life, at 1 to 2 it would be half the size. So 1 centimeter would shrink down to 5 millimeters instead of 10. Let's just use this ruler to understand what that means. So here, 10 millimeters in real life is represented by 20 millimeters at 1 to 2. We're literally doubling the amount of units we can fit into a measurement. So 1 to 5 would mean we're reducing our real world units by 5 times, so now 50 millimeters can fit into a real world centimeter. We keep going like this across all the scales, and it's a bit easier to understand with ratios like 1 to 10 or 1 to 100. This will become second nature to you the longer you work at it, but just understand that we can use these rulers to help us, and they're marked with meters, so it should be fairly straightforward to just translate your measurements. Scale is all about ratios, and remember, it's all about shrinking the real world down to a size that fits on our page so that we can draft it out.